Omega was shoved away from the banquet fire until Alpha King asked who feared her light returning. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Eliza Stone was no stranger to feeling invisible, but tonight, it hit harder than ever. The grand banquet hall echoed with laughter, the sound of glasses clinking, and the murmur of elite wolves exchanging praises. It was the event of the season, a dazzling affair where alpha kings and their betas glided across the polished marble floor, admired by all. Yet, Eliza stood in the shadows, forgotten. She had been shoved aside, her presence dismissed like a ghost, as she watched the other Omega girls being praised and courted by potential mates. The whispers of the high-ranking wolves danced in her ears, their words laced with mockery. Too weak, too plain, not even a cent to claim. Eliza's heart sank with every word. She was an Omega, broken, rejected, forgotten by the very society she was born into. Her scent had never manifested in a way that would make her desirable to the alphas. It was as though she didn't even exist in their eyes. But that was nothing new. She had lived her life with this silent, painful reality, until now. As the night wore on, a chill settled over the banquet. Eliza stood by the grand windows, the light from the chandeliers casting faint reflections on the glass. The glow illuminated her pale features, but it only highlighted the loneliness she felt deep inside. She longed for the acceptance she had never known. She longed for someone to see her, not for her Omega status, but for the person she truly was. Her thoughts were interrupted when a figure entered the room, commanding attention with every step. Alpha King Mason Blackwood. His presence filled the room, his broad shoulders and sharp jawline cutting through the crowd. His eyes, the color of stormy skies, swept over the gathering with calculated indifference. The room fell silent as he approached the center of the hall, the murmurs of the wolves quieting in his wake. But then, his eyes found Eliza. For the briefest moment, everything around her seemed to disappear. His gaze locked with hers, and Eliza's heart skipped a beat. Her breath caught in her throat. Mason Blackwood, the Alpha King, famous for his cruelty, revered for his power, feared by all, was staring at her. And in that moment, she wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't the Omega in the shadows. She was the one he saw, the one he sought. Who fears her light returning? His voice rang out, deep and unwavering, drawing the attention of every wolf in the room. The entire hall fell into a stunned silence. Eliza stood frozen, unable to comprehend the weight of his words. The Alpha King had just spoken about her, in public, and in a way that no one had ever dared to before. The whispers of mockery were replaced by an unfamiliar buzz of anticipation. Could it be? Could the rejected Omega, the one no one had ever cared for, be the one who was worthy of the Alpha King's attention? With that one question, Mason Blackwood had changed everything. Eliza stood still, her heart pounding as the entire banquet hall seemed to hold its breath. Alpha King Mason Blackwood's piercing gaze was still locked on her, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a thick fog. The room, once filled with the hum of conversation, now stood frozen. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. It was as if the world had stopped, and all eyes were on her. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely powerful. It wasn't a power she had ever known before, but one that surged through her veins the moment Mason spoke. Who fears her light returning? The words echoed in her mind, a promise that felt like a future she had never dared to dream. As the silence lingered, a ripple of uncertainty passed through the crowd. Mason Blackwood, the ruler of the Northern Territories, had just spoken to her as though she were his equal, his gaze filled with something she couldn't quite place, something deeper than mere curiosity. Eliza swallowed hard, unsure of what to do or say. She had never been the center of attention. She had never been noticed. And yet here she was, standing in the very heart of this grand hall, with the most powerful man in the kingdom watching her as though she were the most important person in the room. The crowd parted slightly as Mason stepped forward, his dark cloak swirling around him with every step. His tall frame towered over her, but there was no sense of threat in his posture, just an undeniable presence that demanded respect. Eliza could feel her breath catch in her throat, the scent of the rich wood paneling and the faint aroma of wine filling her senses. It was as if time itself had slowed, the moment stretching longer than it should have. Finally, Mason spoke again, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of authority. "You," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, "are not what they say you are." Eliza's mind raced. What did he mean? Was he speaking to her, truly speaking to her? Her heart fluttered in her chest, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had been told all her life that she was nothing, just a weak omega, easily discarded, easily forgotten. But Mason Blackwood, the Alpha King, was looking at her as though she were something far more than that. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and commanding. Without thinking, Eliza found herself nodding, her feet moving before her mind could catch up. She walked toward him, her movements tentative, unsure of what was to come. As she stepped closer, Mason extended his hand, and for a moment, Eliza hesitated. It was the same hand that commanded armies, that ruled kingdoms, that made decisions that shaped the future of their world. And yet, in this moment, it was extended to her, an omega, someone who had always been dismissed. With a steadying breath, Eliza reached out and placed her hand in his. The moment their fingers touched, a spark of energy rushed through her, unlike anything she had ever felt. It was a warmth, a light that seemed to fill her chest, radiating from the core of her being. For the first time in her life, Eliza felt truly seen. And in that moment, she realized that this was only the beginning of something far greater than she could have ever imagined. The beginning of her story, one that would change everything. The Alpha King, who had once been nothing more than a distant legend, to her, now stood beside her, no longer a figure to fear, but someone who saw her for what she truly was. And she, Eliza Stone, the forgotten Omega, was no longer invisible. Eliza's heart raced as Mason Blackwood's hand gently wrapped around hers, guiding her through the bustling crowd. The grand banquet hall, once filled with laughter and gossip, now seemed distant, as if the world outside their little bubble had faded away. The light from the chandeliers above cast soft shadows across the stone walls, but none of it mattered. In this moment, she felt only the warmth of Mason's touch and the electricity that passed between them. With every step, her doubts seemed to melt away, replaced by a new, unfamiliar sense of purpose. The crowd parted as they walked, some casting curious glances, others in awe of the Alpha King's boldness. Eliza had never felt so exposed in her life, yet for the first time, she didn't mind. Mason was beside her, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she knew she was safe. They passed through the ornate doors of the banquet hall and into a quieter, more private space. The tension in her chest eased, but the questions still lingered. What was happening? Why had Mason chosen her? He could have any Omega in the room, any powerful mate to stand beside him as his Luna. So why her? As if sensing her turmoil, Mason turned to her, his voice low and calm. "You wonder why I called you, don't you?" Eliza nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I can see you, Eliza Stone," he continued, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You've been invisible for too long, and I am done letting that happen. The moment I saw you, I knew there was something different about you. Something powerful." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "Powerful?" she whispered, not understanding. "I am just an Omega. I have no scent, no strength. I'm nothing." Mason smiled, a small but genuine smile that softened the sharpness of his features. "That's where you're wrong. Your power doesn't come from your scent, nor your strength. It comes from within. You've been overlooked because you've let others decide your worth. But I see you." His words were like a balm to her wounded soul. She had spent years feeling like she didn't belong, like she was nothing more than a burden to those around her. But Mason's words, they made her believe for the first time that she might actually be something more. As if to prove his point, he led her to a grand window, the moonlight spilling in and illuminating their faces. Eliza stood there, gazing out at the kingdom below, feeling the weight of Mason's presence beside her. She couldn't explain it, but in his presence, everything seemed to feel right. "You are more than what they've told you," Mason continued, his voice gentle. "You are the light that they've been afraid of. They push you away because they fear what you could become. But I don't fear you. I want to see that light shine. Eliza turned to face him, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't quite grasp. And you think I can shine? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mason nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. I know you can. And I'll be here to help you find that strength. Together. For the first time in her life, Eliza felt seen, truly seen, by someone who didn't judge her for her weaknesses but embraced her for her potential. As Mason stepped closer, his presence filled the space between them. Let me show you, he said softly, before leaning down and brushing a gentle kiss against her forehead. Eliza's heart fluttered, her mind racing. This wasn't just a moment of passing kindness. It was the start of something far greater, something she never thought she deserved. And for the first time in her life, Eliza Stone began to believe in the possibility of a future where she was more than just an invisible Omega. A future where she could stand beside an Alpha King and shine brightly. Eliza awoke to the soft glow of dawn filtering through the curtains. The events of the previous night seemed almost surreal, like a dream she had never thought possible. She had been chosen by Alpha King Mason Blackwood. For so long, she had been invisible, just another Omega fading into the background, unnoticed by those around her. But now, for the first time in her life, someone saw her. Really saw her. And not just anyone. Mason Blackwood, the ruler of the Northern Territories, the Alpha King. She sat up slowly, her fingers brushing against the silky sheets, the warmth of the bed still comforting her skin. The castle she now found herself in was unlike anything she had ever known. The stone walls, the grand tapestries that adorned the halls, the vast windows that looked out over the kingdom. It was all so magnificent, so foreign. She had spent her life in small, modest homes, always feeling like she was on the outside looking in. But now, she was in the heart of it all, with Mason by her side. The thought made her heart race with a mix of excitement and fear. She had never been one to dream big, to imagine a life beyond the confines of her station. But Mason had opened her eyes to a different world, a world where she had a place, a purpose. She could hardly believe it. But as she gazed out the window, she saw Mason standing in the courtyard below, his commanding presence impossible to ignore. Even from this distance, she could feel the power that radiated from him. He stood tall, his broad shoulders and regal posture exuding strength and authority. But there was something different in the way he stood today, something that made him seem less like the distant king and more like the man who had seen her, truly seen her. As if sensing her gaze, Mason looked up, his eyes locking with hers. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips, and Eliza felt her heart skip a beat. There was a warmth in his eyes that she hadn't seen before, and it made her feel safe, protected. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. Without thinking, she stood and walked to the door, her feet carrying her toward him. She wasn't sure what she expected, but when she reached the courtyard, Mason was already there, waiting for her. "You're awake," he said softly, his voice full of warmth. "I thought you might want to join me for breakfast." Eliza nodded, a little overwhelmed by the kindness in his voice. I didn't think this was real," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Mason stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "It's real, Eliza. You're not just an Omega. You're my mate. And I'll never let you feel like you don't belong again." The words settled over her like a comforting blanket, and she finally allowed herself to breathe. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had a place, like she was part of something important. And as she stood there, in the presence of the man who had changed everything for her, she realized that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. A chapter where she wasn't invisible. A chapter where she was loved, cherished, and respected. A chapter where she could finally shine. The days that followed were like nothing Eliza had ever experienced. Each morning, she awoke to the sound of birds singing outside her window and the gentle warmth of the sun rising over the horizon. She felt a sense of peace that she had never known before, a peace that came from knowing she was not just another forgotten Omega. She was Eliza Stone, the mate of Alpha King Mason Blackwood. It was almost too much to take in, too surreal. She had spent so long thinking she was nothing, just a weak Omega with no purpose, no future. But now, everything had changed. And with each passing day, Mason's presence beside her made her believe more and more that she was worthy of this life, worthy of the man who saw her as more than just an omega. One afternoon, as Eliza wandered the vast gardens of the castle, she caught sight of Mason standing near the fountain, his back to her as he gazed out at the flowing water. His posture was strong, yet there was a softness to him that Eliza hadn't seen before. He wasn't just the Alpha King who ruled the Northern Territories. He was a man who, despite his power, carried a quiet, unspoken burden. Without thinking, Eliza approached him, her steps light on the grass. As she reached his side, Mason turned to her, his silver-gray eyes locking with hers. "I was just thinking about the future," he said softly, his voice warm and inviting. Eliza tilted her head slightly, curious. "The future?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Mason replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "The future we'll build together. You and me. I know this is all new to you, Eliza, and I know it's overwhelming. But I want you to know that you are not alone. You have me. And we have a future where you don't have to hide, where you don't have to feel invisible." Eliza's heart fluttered at his words. She had never thought about a future before. She had never imagined a life where she was truly seen, where she mattered. But here Mason was, offering her a future, a life by his side. It was a life she had never dreamed of. But now that it was within reach, she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "I don't know what to say," Eliza admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Mason stepped closer, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You don't have to say anything, Eliza. Just know that I'm here. And together, we will face whatever comes our way. You're not just my mate. You're my equal. And that means more to me than anything else." Eliza's breath caught in her throat as Mason's words sank in. For the first time in her life, she felt truly valued. Not just for her role as his mate, but for who she was as a person. She was more than just an omega. She was Eliza Stone, a woman with her own strength, her own power. And with Mason by her side, she was ready to embrace the future he was offering. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. And together, they would build a life that was theirs, a life where she could finally shine. The days that followed were like nothing Eliza had ever experienced. Each morning, she awoke to the sound of birds singing outside her window and the gentle warmth of the sun rising over the horizon. She felt a sense of peace that she had never known before, a peace that came from knowing she was not just another forgotten omega. She was Eliza Stone, the mate of Alpha King Mason Blackwood. It was almost too much to take in, too surreal. She had spent so long thinking she was nothing, just a weak omega with no purpose, no future. But now, everything had changed. And with each passing day, Mason's presence beside her made her believe more and more that she was worthy of this life, worthy of the man who saw her as more than just an omega. One afternoon, as Eliza wandered the vast gardens of the castle, she caught sight of Mason standing near the fountain, his back to her as he gazed out at the flowing water. His posture was strong, yet there was a softness to him that Eliza hadn't seen before. He wasn't just the Alpha King who ruled the Northern Territories. He was a man who, despite his power, carried a quiet, unspoken burden. Without thinking, Eliza approached him, her steps light on the grass. As she reached his side, Mason turned to her, his silver-gray eyes locking with hers. "I was just thinking about the future," he said softly, his voice warm and inviting. Eliza tilted her head slightly, curious. "The future?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Mason replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "The future we'll build together. You and me. I know this is all new to you, Eliza, and I know it's overwhelming. But I want you to know that you are not alone. You have me. And we have a future where you don't have to hide, where you don't have to feel invisible." Eliza's heart fluttered at his words. She had never thought about a future before. She had never imagined a life where she was truly seen, where she mattered. But here Mason was, offering her a future, a life by his side. It was a life she had never dreamed of. But now that it was within reach, she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "I don't know what to say," Eliza admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Mason stepped closer, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You don't have to say anything, Eliza. Just know that I'm here. And together, We will face whatever comes our way. You're not just my mate. You're my equal. And that means more to me than anything else. Eliza's breath caught in her throat as Mason's words sank in. For the first time in her life, she felt truly valued. Not just for her role as his mate, but for who she was as a person. She was more than just an Omega. She was Eliza Stone, a woman with her own strength, her own power. And with Mason by her side, she was ready to embrace the future he was offering. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. And together, they would build a life that was theirs, a life where she could finally shine. Eliza felt the weight of the moment settle around her, as though the entire castle held its breath. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the council hall, casting soft golden stripes across the polished stone floor. She stood beside Mason, their shoulders almost touching, as the murmurs of gathered nobles faded into a hush. This was the first time he had asked her to stand with him publicly, not as a guest, not as someone he had noticed, but as someone who mattered, as someone who belonged. Yet Eliza could feel the unease of the room, the quiet questions and the shifting glances around her. She was an Omega who had lived her entire life unseen, and suddenly she was beside the Alpha King himself. Mason sensed the tension before she did. His voice, calm and grounded, cut through the whispers. "Eliza is here because she deserves to be," he said, without raising his tone. Yet the simple statement carried undeniable authority. "She stands with me because she has earned her place." Eliza felt her breath catch, the familiar sting behind her eyes returning. She blinked it away quickly, refusing to let her emotions spill in front of the council. Mason stepped slightly closer, his presence creating a quiet shield around her. "If any of you have questions," he continued, "you may ask them openly instead of letting fear write false stories." The room fell silent, and for a long moment, no one dared speak. Then a woman stepped forward, dressed in deep forest green, her voice gentle. "Your Majesty," she said, "we do not doubt you. We simply have never seen you choose to stand with anyone in this way." Mason nodded, accepting the truth in her statement. "And that is exactly why it is time for change." He turned to Eliza then, his expression softening in a way she knew only she would ever see. "Tell me, Eliza," he said quietly enough that only she could hear, "are you afraid?" She shook her head, though her heart was racing. "Not with you," she whispered back. Mason's eyes warmed, as though her words had steadied something inside him. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers in a simple, steady gesture of reassurance. It was not a claim or a declaration. It was a grounding, an anchor, a truth. The council members exchanged glances, but the atmosphere shifted. The tension eased, replaced by something closer to curiosity than judgment. Eliza felt her shoulders relax as Mason guided her forward to stand beside him at the head of the hall. "You will see more of her," Mason said to the room. "And in time, you will understand why." His words were firm yet hopeful, as though he already saw a future they had not imagined. Eliza looked up at him then, realizing that he was not just protecting her. He was preparing the world to see her, truly see her, the way he already did. And for the first time, she felt ready to let them. When the council hall finally emptied and the echo of footsteps faded into silence, Eliza found herself standing beside Mason in the long corridor that overlooked the eastern gardens. The sunset poured warm amber light through the arched windows, softening the corners of the stone walls and wrapping the space in a gentle glow. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Eliza's fingers still tingled where Mason had held her hand, his steady grip lingering in her memory like a quiet promise. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of what had just happened. She had stood before the council. She had been seen. She had not crumbled. And Mason had been beside her through every breath, every heartbeat. "You handled that well," Mason said at last, his voice warm, a gentle contrast to the authority he had carried in the hall. Eliza looked up at him, her expression surprised. "I did not say anything," she replied softly. "You did not have to," Mason said. "Sometimes strength is not in the words spoken, but in the courage to stand and be present." His words settled into her chest like a quiet ember, glowing. She looked out at the gardens below, watching the way the evening breeze moved through the tall grass. "I felt their eyes on me," she admitted. "Not unkind, but curious, unsure." Mason stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the steadiness of his presence. "They will understand in time," he said. "You are not what they expect. That is why they hesitate. But that is also why you are exactly what this kingdom needs." Eliza turned toward him, her heartbeat picking up. "What if I am not enough?" she whispered. Mason's gaze softened, the kind of softness that only she seemed to draw out of him. "Eliza," he said, her name spoken with quiet certainty, "you are more than enough. You have a light that others tried to bury because they did not know how to face it. But I see it, and I will not let the world dim it again." She felt her breath shake, not from fear, but from relief, from the rare gift of being believed in. She had never known what it felt like until Mason placed that belief in her hands. Slowly, he reached out, offering his hand once more. This time, when Eliza placed her hand in his, she felt the same warmth as before, but now it was steadier, less surprising, as if her soul already recognized the shape of his. "Come," Mason murmured. "There is something I want to show you." He led her down the corridor and through a set of tall doors that opened to a quiet balcony overlooking the kingdom. The sky was painted in pink and gold, the sun sinking behind the distant mountains. Mason let go of her hand only to gesture toward the vast land below. "This," he said, "is the world you will help guide." Eliza's breath caught. The valleys, the forests, the villages, they stretched farther than she could see, glowing softly in the fading light. "Mason," she whispered, overwhelmed. "I am just learning how to stand without trembling." "And yet," Mason said gently, "you are already standing taller than you know." She did not respond, not with words. Instead, she simply let herself feel the truth of the moment, the warmth of the sunset, the quiet strength beside her, and the first real glimpse of what her future could be. For the first time in her life, Eliza Stone allowed herself to believe in something extraordinary. Herself. Eliza stood at the edge of the balcony, her eyes fixed on the view below. The kingdom stretched out before her, vast and full of possibility. The sun had set, casting the world in a soft twilight glow. She could hear the distant hum of life continuing below, families gathering, workers finishing their day, the kingdom as a whole moving forward. It was all so alive, so real, and for the first time, she felt as though she was part of it. Mason was beside her, his presence a steady anchor. She could feel the weight of everything that had happened in the last few weeks, and though it was overwhelming, it was also thrilling. She had come from a life where she was nothing more than a quiet, invisible omega, hidden in the shadows. Now, she stood beside the most powerful man in the kingdom, no longer just a bystander in her own life. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Mason's voice was low, carrying a warmth that seemed to wrap around her like the evening air. Eliza nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She had been raised to accept her place in the world, to never ask for more than what was given to her. But now, with Mason by her side, the world had opened up in a way she could never have imagined. "It's more than beautiful," she replied, her voice soft but certain. "It feels like home." Mason turned toward her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, his lips curved into a slight smile, the kind of smile that only Eliza seemed to inspire in him. "Home," he echoed, his voice deep and rich with meaning. "I think you're right." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from her face, his touch gentle but purposeful. "You found your place here, Eliza. And so have I. With you." Eliza felt her heart race at his words, at the sincerity in his eyes. She had always dreamed of being seen, of being more than just an afterthought in the world. But here, with Mason, she felt as though she had finally been recognized for who she truly was. No longer hidden, no longer silenced. She was Eliza Stone, and she mattered. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "But I know I want to face it with you." Mason's smile deepened, and for a moment, the weight of everything else seemed to fall away. In that moment, there was no kingdom, no expectations, no responsibilities. There was just the two of them, standing together on the balcony, with the world spread out before them. "We will face it together," he said softly, his voice a promise that resonated deep within her. "Whatever comes, we will face it side by side." Eliza took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She had found her place. She had found her future. And with Mason by her side, she knew there was nothing she couldn't overcome. Together, They would build a life full of love, strength, and the kind of partnership she had only dreamed of. The stars above shimmered as though they, too, were watching over them, a silent witness to the beginning of a new chapter. Eliza turned toward Mason, her heart swelling with the certainty that this was just the start of something extraordinary. Together, they would create a legacy, one that would stand the test of time.